Good morning to you. We're on our final day of this seminar. Appreciate the opportunity to be here this weekend. In our first session, we very briefly dismantled naturalism, evolution, which is the standard model that is taught in our science classrooms across the country. In our second session, and in this session, we turned and are doing kind of the opposite. We're giving more of, instead of the negative case for the creation model, we're giving positive evidence for the supernatural, the existence of the supernatural realm, and therefore a God. And so that's what we're going to be doing in this first session, which will be kind of a continuation of the one we had yesterday, our first session yesterday. Recall again what atheistic philosopher and professor Paul Ricci said. It's true that everything designed has a designer, and that statement summarizes what we call the teleological argument for the existence of God. If you can find design in the universe, then there had to be, by implication, a designer. And atheists like Ricci admit that basic truth. Granted, they generally refuse to admit the existence of design in the universe, but they concede that the presence of design would indicate there must be a designer, or at least most evolutionists concede that. I've run into some that say, no, you can have design and not have a designer, which is of course totally rational, but generally speaking they admit design demands a designer. Logically, you can't have a poem without there being a poet, and a painting requires a painter, a fingerprint requires a finger. Common sense tells us when design is present, it's not complicated to pinpoint something that's complicated. And it's not complex trying to put your finger on something that has the attribute of complexity. And where there is planning and complexity and design, there must necessarily be a designer. And so the question, of course, is, does the universe in fact contain the characteristics of design? Well, in fact, there's an infinite number of examples from the natural realm around us that clearly show intent, purpose, design. In our second session, we saw that many in the atheistic community actually unwittingly concede the presence of design in the universe by engaging in biomimicry, where you're designing something by using something in nature as your blueprint. But regardless of whether or not they concede it, the examples of design that are all around us are many, and they're diverse, and they're very compelling. I'm a thermal scientist, so examples of thermal design in the universe are of special interest to me. So I want to take a few moments this morning to examine one of the amazing thermal systems that God created, and that is the human biothermal system. This is the system that in your body that oversees how your body responds to temperature fluctuations in the environment or in your body. Well, we've all been in situations where temperature significantly affected us. Okay, maybe you get too cold, right? We're in the winter season, we know what that's like. Maybe we didn't wear a thick enough coat. We went and watched a football game and the temperature suddenly drops without warning. Maybe you woke up in the middle of the night and you needed that extra blanket in order to try to deal with the cold. Or maybe you stayed out in the sun and got too hot, you forgot to wear a hat. Maybe you were silly enough to go out and mow the lawn in the hottest part of the day. Or maybe you get so hot that you just didn't even feel right. You get dizzy, you faint. Maybe you're at a theme park, you see someone else faint or have a heat stroke from walking around all day in the heat, and so we forget to drink enough fluids. All right, so what do we do in these situations? Well, we do whatever we can to help fix the problem, and we just wait till we feel better, and then usually we quickly move on with our lives. Have you ever stopped to think about what your body did to keep you from dying or to keep your tissues from being damaged in those situations? How did your body respond and acclimate to whatever the extreme temperature was? Have you ever thought about what your hand and body did and it responds to touching a hot stove? Or how your body adjusted to a hot bath when you ease into it and you have that initial kind of shock, that jolt because of that temperature differential, but then it quickly goes away. And you have the opposite when you jump into a cold pool. Your body quickly adjusts to that temperature. And so we kind of take it for granted that the discomfort passes and that your bodies have actually done something pretty amazing. they've automatically adjusted to the extreme temperature difference between your body and whatever it is you touched. But in actuality, the human body's biothermal system isn't something that you can just dismiss without a thought. This is proof positive evidence of design, and therefore a designer, a chief engineer of the human body. Thermoregulation is the term that we use to describe an organism's ability to regulate its body temperature. So that is to keep your body's temperature within certain levels despite the surrounding environment. So it's kind of like an air conditioning or a heating system for living creatures. 91.8 degrees to 100.8 degrees is the range that describes the normal human body temperature when that measurement is taken orally. And what is considered to be normal is based on where the measurement is taken on your body, the level of activity of the person that's being measured. Even gender can play a role. And so it's not a hard and fast number, although many people use the average number of 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. The amazing thing is that your body is equipped with such a sophisticated biothermal system that the vast majority of the time you don't even have to think about your body temperature. So you can just go about your day-to-day life, working extremely hard outside, being extremely active, or you can just lay around watching TV, being a couch potato, and your body's biothermal system is regulating your temperature for you without you thinking about it. It's keeping your temperature within a safe range without you giving it a second thought. Well, your body does this through the use of this extremely complex thermoregulatory system. This is the system that helps to regulate your body temperature. A lot of things going on. I won't have time to get into each one of these areas this morning. I just want to highlight a few of the most interesting things. The entire thermoregulatory system, the entire temperature system for your body is controlled, as you might suspect, by the brain. And the processing center in the brain that controls the biothermal system is the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is basically your thermostat for your body's air conditioning system. It controls the whole thermoregulatory system, and the body uses temperature sensors like thermometers or thermocouples in engineering. These are called thermoreceptors, and these temperature sensors are located throughout your body, and they're reading the temperature wherever they are. These thermoreceptors are in your hypothalamus, they're in your skin, they're in your bladder, they're in your eyes, even in the cornea. The thermoreceptors that are in the skin are called the peripheral nerves, and they can detect changes in the external temperature, and so temperature changes in the air. And then thermoreceptors in the hypothalamus can actually detect changes in your blood temperature. And so from all this temperature information, the hypothalamus is able to adjust your body's thermoregulatory functions by using what are called effector nerves. These are like power lines that are used to communicate with various parts of your body and initiate various kinds of thermal responses, which in turn affect heat loss from your body. So a very sophisticated system, clearly shows design and intent, not random accidents. Now the amazing thing is that the way that the hypothalamus is controlling your body's temperature is the equivalent of what we call a fuzzy logic controller in engineering. What in the world is a fuzzy logic controller? We use controllers in our car. A simple one would be cruise control in your car. You've got in an air conditioning unit, we have controllers when you set it to keep your home temperature below a certain number, for example, if you've got the air conditioner on. And so these are controllers, but they're not the same kind as what we call a fuzzy logic controller. These controllers are more simple. They're called on-off controllers or bang-bang controllers. The hypothalamus operates like a more sophisticated controller, a fuzzy logic controller, much more sophisticated and efficient than the control systems that are used like in the cruise control and in the AC in your house. So here's how it works. In an air conditioning unit in your house, when the temperature in the house gets too high, okay, so it gets above the number that you've set for that system, the air conditioner will just turn on full steam until the temperature in the house drops back down to the number you set. Okay, at least this is the standard air conditions we've had for many years. Are actually starting to design air conditioning units that are more sophisticated than this. The AC unit only has the option of being all the way on or all the way off. There's no middle ground. And so when that AC turns on, The motor is on full power and the system is putting out the coldest air that it has to offer until the house drops back down to that desired temperature, and then it abruptly just cuts off. Okay, so the temperature in the house and the state of the motor that's running it, running your air conditioner, it tends to have this more jagged profile, very abrupt. It's sharp up and down like teeth. And so the temperature is really less regulated. It's not very efficient. It doesn't stay as close to the temperature that you want. Now, it wouldn't be good for your body's temperature to be so uncontrolled. A fuzzy controller like the hypothalamus allows for degrees of on and off, different levels. So with a fuzzy controller, the air conditioner could be on, but the motor wouldn't be quite at full speed, so it's not blowing as high, or maybe it's not putting out air that's quite as cold if that's what's needed. So it's more efficient. So a fuzzy controller keeps the temperature profile more regulated and smooth and closer to that desired temperature. It doesn't have that jagged look. And that's important because if your body gets too far away from the temperature it needs to be, you'll be in danger. And I'll discuss that more later. Now, amazingly, the hypothalamus uses this sophisticated temperature control like that. If your body gets too hot, the hypothalamus doesn't just turn the whole temperature control system on full power. It varies its response based on the temperature and based on the location in your body where the temperature isn't what it needs to be. And so the hypothalamus actually allows for different levels of response to temperature changes, like a fuzzy logic control system. Now, in engineering, we design controllers, fuzzy logic controllers. The hypothalamus, by definition, they're designed. They require intent and purpose. If you have a control system, there must be an engineer that designed it. The hypothalamus is a control system. It requires an engineer to have designed it. How could the hypothalamus, which is equipped with complex engineering elements like this, just accidentally evolve? That's irrational to say that. It would require a blind faith to believe that could happen. The hypothalamus, the thermostat for the human body's thermoregulatory system, is decisive evidence of intent, purpose, and design. Another feature of this system, did you know that shivering is an important intentional part of your thermoregulatory system? As you get colder, the hypothalamus sends the message to your muscles and tells them to start shaking or shivering. And that increased use of muscles leads to increased metabolism, so more calorie burning, more heat production. You've also then got friction and heat being produced from the muscles contacting the surrounding tissues. So these tissues surrounding those shivering muscles are warmed up from the friction. So again, you got to be asking yourself the question, okay, to stand back and think through this. Does this sound like an accident, or does this sound purposeful? Something that had to have been thought through. You've got vasodilation and vasoconstriction. This is one of the most fascinating features of our system. When the temperature sensors in your skin, the thermoreceptors, whenever they send the message to the hypothalamus and say, hey, it's getting too hot down here, the hypothalamus sends the message to those blood vessels that are close to the skin, and the message tells those blood vessels to swell, to dilate. Now that swelling allows warm blood to flow to those areas that are closest to the skin. That's why sometimes you look reddish and flushed when you get hot. And then while that warm blood is closer to the surface, it allows more heat to be released into the air from that warm blood. When you get cold, the hypothalamus does the opposite. It tells those vessels to contract, keeping more of the warm blood further away from those exterior parts of the body so that the heat isn't released as easily there. And at the same time, the warm blood is pulled in towards your vital organs, keeping them more warm. And so if the temperature stays too low for too long, the vital organs are given preference over the outer organs that you can technically live without. And so the safety of your fingers and hands and your toes and feet, the tip of your nose, your ears, those are sacrificed for the safety of the vital organs that you need to keep you alive. Now again, step back and think, how in the world would a feature like that just randomly and accidentally evolve? Again, you'd have to have a blind faith to believe that can happen. Blood vessel contraction and dilation shows clearly planning and intent, purpose. Then you've got blood viscosity. When you get cold, blood actually becomes thicker. it becomes more viscous is the term. And so the blood flow rate will tend to decrease, and that results in less heat loss through the veins. And when you get hot, blood becomes thinner, it becomes less viscous, and the blood flow rate will tend to increase according to Poisseuille's equation. So bottom line, vasodilation, vasoconstriction, thermal control of blood viscosity, all design features of this system. And then there's body fat, which serves as insulation, of course, helping heat to stay inside our bodies. Now, the interesting thing is that during the winter months, when it's colder, we tend to gain body fat. We gain more insulation. And that may tend to make us feel bad about our appearance in this vain day and age we live in. But if you think about areas of the world where people don't have the luxury of heating systems and lots of extra blankets and clothes like we have, well, the tendency to gain fat in the winter is pretty handy. Why do you gain fat? Well, for one, we tend to be less active than in the winter than we are in the summer, but also physiologically, we know that the brain chemical serotonin actually affects your mood and your appetite. And scientists have discovered that serotonin is at its lowest levels in your brain during the winter and on dark, cooler days. On sunny days, serotonin tends to be higher. So in order to boost serotonin on colder days, our bodies will tend to have more cravings for sugary, starchy foods. And those foods help boost serotonin by increasing insulin, which pushes tryptophan into the brain, which in turn initiates the building of serotonin. The serotonin boost in the hypothalamus enhances the thermoregulatory system, especially in response to cold temperatures. And at the same time, you gain fat from the carbs, which helps to insulate your body from the cold. Another characteristic of body fat that shows purpose and design for thermoregulatory systems, scientists know that statistically women tend to have more body fat than men. On average, men tend to have about 17% body fat. Women have about 6% more, about 23%. So women tend to be fatter. They're fatties compared to men. And this is just physiologically, so don't kill the messenger here. Why is this the case? Why do women have more fat? Well, it's partially due to physiological reasons. The female anatomy is different. But one big reason, I would say, is for protection. Women are statistically and in harmony with 1 Peter 3:7. They generally tend to be smaller and weaker than men. Not a very PC idea, but hey, it's true. They're in more need of physical protection. Fat helps to provide a cushioning barrier that protects the vital organs if a woman is struck or falls. But from a thermal point of view, the extra fat in women helps to provide them with more heat insulation for heat retention, since women, on average, historically, tend to be naturally less physically active, and their role is different from men in the way that God set that up. Therefore, they have less heat generation from muscle movement. But of course, perhaps the most obvious benefit of more fat for women is protection for babies during pregnancy. Mommy fat provides protection for that baby and helps to keep the baby warm. So body fat, encouraged by serotonin levels and gender physiology, another amazing design feature of the thermoregulatory system. Then there's the body's composition. Our bodies are made up of about 50 to 70% water by weight, and it's different again based on gender and other factors, but 60% is a good average. Now that has a very important thermal implication. Water has a special property which makes it very handy in keeping your temperature from getting too extreme one way or the other. In thermal science, it has what is called a high specific heat capacity. What that means is it can hold a lot of heat, way more than almost any other natural substance on Earth. Water can store a lot of heat or lose a lot of heat without its temperature being drastically changed. And so it acts like an air conditioning unit for our body just by itself. It helps to keep our temperature relatively constant. So it takes a lot more heat or a lot more cold to drastically change your body temperature, since it has so much water in it, because water will tend to keep your body temperature regulated close to your body's core temperature. This is why it's so important to make sure you're drinking enough water. This is crucial in your thermoregulatory system. And another interesting fact about the percentage of water in our bodies is that our body weight can actually go up several pounds due to water retention in the summer. Our bodies go through a process called heat acclimatization when you enter into the summer months, and you retain more water in order to regulate your temperature and prepare for higher levels of sweat loss. Now, what if our bodies didn't have as much water? Or maybe our bodies used another fluid instead of water, making up 60% of our bodies. What would happen? Well, if that were the case, the body's temperature would be more susceptible to temperature fluctuation due to environmental temperature changes. So, from an engineering perspective, using water specifically, and a lot of it in the design of the human body, was an excellent choice. Again, this shows design, planning, intent, and purpose. Then there's the bladder, specifically the bladder's detrusor muscle. You've got thermoreceptors in your bladder that are taking the temperature, and it sends that temperature information to the hypothalamus. And as the temperature of the bladder drops due to the cold, a bladder cooling reflex is triggered in the hypothalamus, and the message is sent to the detrusor muscle on the bladder telling it to contract. That makes you feel the urge to eliminate the cool water from your body and therefore keep your body's temperature more regulated. Now again, stand back and think, how in the world would that happen by accident? Once again, this mechanism shows clear design and intent, some master chief engineer that knew what he was doing in the design of the human body. You also have, those are more, I would say, interior thermoregulatory factors you have in your body, and there's several others I didn't have time to talk about. You also have exterior thermoregulation, so this is stuff more on the exterior of your body. You have, for example, the skin, and on the skin you have hair, which has been considered by many to be a vestigial organ. Evolutionists believe that hair was a leftover organ from our ape-like ancestors that we no longer need, and it just hasn't been eliminated from our physiology yet. We, of course, know that is not true. Hair serves many functions, including being an alarm system. There are tripwires that alert us if something may be on our skin, potentially dangerous things. It also serves as a lubricant. It lessens the friction between your skin when you move, like in your armpit region, for example. And it serves as a filter, like in the nose and the ears, keeping potentially harmful elements out of your body. Your eyebrows, your eyelashes give protection to your eyes, keeping fallen particles out of them. And hair serves an aesthetical purpose, adding beauty to the human head, especially around the eyes. But besides all of these functions, of course, hair also has thermal functions as well. Your eyebrows and eyelashes serve as barriers to sweat droplets, helping to protect your vision when you get hot. Hair provides protection from thermal radiation. Eyelashes provide shading for the eyes from harmful sun rays. And the hair on your scalp and face and arms and legs helps to provide shading to prevent sunburn and therefore skin cancer. Hair acts as a thermal insulator for your arms and legs and armpits and scalp and your face and so forth, helping your body to retain heat by providing an extra layer of fabric on your skin. Now, interestingly, have you ever noticed where hair tends to be localized on the human body? Again, I would say even the location of places where you have a lot of hair was good design. We know that heat rises, and so it's interesting to note that the body seems to have been designed to have more hair, more insulation in those areas of the body that heat would tend to rise to and there be released into the surroundings. And so you find more hair in those places that helps to provide insulation. So more hair would help to insulate the body in those areas and retain some of that heat that would be lost. And then there's piloerection. This is a scientist's fancy way of saying goosebumps. Amazing part, again, of your bioregulatory system. The thermoreceptors that are in your skin are constantly reading the temperature of the air and sending that information to the hypothalamus, and when the temperature readings from some of those thermoreceptors are low enough, the hypothalamus makes the decision to send a message back to those areas where that cold temperature was detected. Now, there are muscles attached at the base of each one of those hair follicles. And the hypothalamus message tells those muscles to contract. That contraction generates a little bit of interior heat, which helps. But more importantly, it raises those hairs. Now, why would that happen? The raised hairs actually catch heat that is being released by the body and creates what we call a thermal mat, a heat pillow between the cold and your skin. It creates a little insulation barrier. The opposite happens when you get hot and the hairs are lowered. And what's more, have you ever noticed that goosebumps only pop up where they're needed? The hypothalamus doesn't just send a generic message to all of the hairs on your body, telling them all to stand up like a goosebump on and off switch. No, the hypothalamus is able to pinpoint the localized areas where the temperature is too cold and only raise those hairs that need to be raised. So try putting your arm in the freezer for a while, just one of your arms, and watch the goosebumps on one arm come up and the other one, they don't. And you'll see what I'm talking about. And then there's skin pore size playing a role in heat retention. When the surrounding temperature drops and your hypothalamus gives the message to generate goosebumps, the skin pores for each hair decrease at the same time. And so the pore sizes get smaller, allowing for less heat loss through those holes. Again, you step back and think, how in the world did all of that just accidentally happen one day? It makes no sense to say that. Again, goosebumps, shout out, design. What about the fact that men, okay, so women are fatties, right? But men tend to be more hairy, right? This also proves, I think, to be a design feature for the human biothermal system. Men, on average, have 8 to 10 times more testosterone than women. And according to the American Association for Clinical Chemistry, the amount of hair a person has been shown to be proportional to testosterone levels. And so men tend to have a lot more hair than women. Now that's handy for different reasons, but from a thermal perspective it's handy because men tend to be larger than women and be involved in more physical activity, and therefore we sweat more. So how's that helpful? Well, incidentally, one of the beneficial functions of hair is that it tends to catch and hold sweat droplets and keep those on the skin, which helps to cool the skin more efficiently. More on that in a moment. So men sweat more, and therefore we have more hair spread out in important places to help with the sweat cooling process, which I'll talk about in a moment. So again, another interesting feature of this thermoregulatory system. So what about sweat? Well, you've got temperature receptors that are located, again, throughout the body. These are heat sensors taking the temperature, sending that information to the hypothalamus in the brain, which then kicks in various parts of the thermal system to compensate for the temperature changes. Now, some of these elements that the hypothalamus is controlling for temperature adjustment, of course, are the sweat glands. So if the body gets too hot from the outside temperature or from lots of activity, the hypothalamus senses the increase in your body's core temperature, and it reacts by increasing the blood flow to the skin, which in turn stimulates these sweat glands. So in essence, the hypothalamus tells the sweat glands to start secreting more sweat onto the surface of your skin. Now, why would it do that? Well, remember what I mentioned earlier, that water has this characteristic of being able to retain high amounts of heat. So as your body's temperature rises, and all that water is getting hotter, your hypothalamus makes the decision, hey, we got to get some of this hot water out of your body and onto the surface of your skin, where some of that heat can then be quickly lost through evaporation, radiation, and convection as it comes into contact with moving air. That in turn leaves cooler water on your skin. Now, one of the rules of thermodynamics, the Clausius statement of the second law, is that heat always moves from higher temperature areas to lower temperature places. And so the cooler water, the sweat that's now on your skin, causes heat from your skin, which is hotter, to be sucked into these sweat droplets, where the heat is then quickly released to the surrounding air. So it basically acts as this conduit to suck heat out of your body. Now, how in the world, again, would a process like that just accidentally happen? Again, it seems to me a person would have to be so biased against the idea of a God to try to say that that could happen. And in our next session, we'll talk about some of what's really going on, why people would be doing that. Another type of exterior thermoregulation comes from behavioral instincts. What do you tend to do when you get cold? Well, you might instinctively pull your arms in, or you put your head down, you curl up. So you instinctively do things that will conserve body heat. Now we know from science that these types of behaviors will keep you warm. But why is it instinctive that you do these things? I would argue this is an example of pre-programming. God has programmed into us certain behaviors that you'll instinctively do, and pre-programming, as always, involves a master programmer. Another amazing feature, have you ever noticed how your eyes tend to water when they get cold? Maybe from a gust of cold wind. Well, scientists have discovered that you've got thermoreceptors in your eye taking the temperature in the cornea. And as the cornea thermoreceptors read the temperature of their eyes and they tell the hypothalamus, hey, we're getting too cold over here, the hypothalamus tells the tear ducts to generate tears. So hot fluids from within your body to be injected onto your eyes, and notice the water has a little bit of salt in it, which helps as well to regulate the temperature of your eyes. So the warm tears help to keep your eyes from freezing and blinding you, and so you can add tear generation to the list of temperature regulation. You ever thought about how much is going on just to keep your body's temperature safe? There's a lot going on here. A lot of, it says something about a creator that is that concerned about our comfort. That's what it says. Not only does it say something that there has to be a creator, it says something about the nature of this creator. Very concerned with our comfort, and so has designed us with a very sophisticated body. So we could go on and on. I've only touched really the hem of the garment here. We haven't even looked at how your body responds to thermal damage from burns and sunburn and blisters and so forth, or even how thermal therapy can be used to help heal the body. But let's step back and just consider some of the implications of what we've looked at so far. There's no way that these features of the human body could be the result of random processes. They show clear design. But beyond that, consider this. If your body was not able to regulate your temperature with the amazing degree of accuracy that it does, the result would be catastrophic. If your temperature deviates just 2 degrees from its normal temperature, your health is in serious danger. 2 degrees is not very much, is it? And if your temperature deviates just 5 degrees from normal, the consequences could be deadly. So think about that, 5 degrees? That means that the human body's biothermal system has to be very effective in quickly responding to temperature fluctuations before your body's core temperature gets too far away from what it needs to be. Its mechanisms have to be very effective in warding off heat and cold. And so the thermoregulatory system has to be extremely well designed to keep us alive. Hyperthermia results if your temperature gets too high. So hyperthermia occurs when your body is producing or absorbing more heat than it can manage. And that usually happens in temperatures above 101 degrees. If your temperature climbs above 104, it'll be life-threatening. Brain damage will likely occur. Hypothermia results if your temperature is too low, around 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And these conditions, as you know, can be deadly as well. So if your body temperature moves into these deadly ranges and stays there for more than just a few minutes, not millions of years, but a few minutes, severe damage and or death will occur. Your thermoregulatory system is constantly at work trying to prevent these dangerous conditions from happening. So again, you got to think rationally here. If evolution is true, hypothermia and hyperthermia would have quickly killed off any kind of creature and their ancestors long before their bodies could have evolved this extremely complex biothermal system which keeps our temperatures so precisely regulated. So if our thermoregulatory system were not intact at this very moment, every one of us would quickly die. The surrounding temperature in here is probably 72 degrees. Your temperature is going to want to move towards that. Very quickly if it's not constantly regulating the temperature as efficiently as it is. How could Darwinian evolution, macroevolution, evolve the biothermal system in the time span that would be required to keep us alive? How could random chance processes even create this complex system at all, given an exorbitant amount of time, much less evolve it in a time span required to keep us alive? How could the temperature sensors that are located all over your body, these thermoreceptors. How come they're in strategic places? How could they have evolved so quickly? How could the communication lines between those thermoreceptors and the hypothalamus, how could they evolve and evolve in time to prevent death? How could the hypothalamus evolve the thermostat capabilities that it has to take temperature readings from all these thermoreceptors and know what to do with it, to know to respond by sending messages along these specific design pathways to various muscles and sweat glands and into your eyes and bladder, producing tears? How could evolution account for the temperature sensors that are in the bladder and their ability to determine what the temperature is? How could evolution account for the power line of communication between the bladder and the hypothalamus? So a partially formed effector nerve that only goes halfway down would be completely pointless. The effector nerve had to be completely formed and installed from the beginning. That shows irreducible complexity. How could evolution cause the temperature sensors to read a temperature and know to send that information on these power lines, and then the hypothalamus gets that information and has to know what to do with it? What do I need to do with this? Okay, I need to send a message back to the bladder, to the detrusor muscle, and tell it that it needs to contract so that it'll make you want to eliminate cold liquid from your body. How could the hypothalamus evolve the ability to induce shivering and sweating? I didn't even talk about metabolic rate fluctuations, dilation and constriction of blood vessels, much less not only that it could do those, but how would it know that it should do those? And only at certain times. Constricting skin pores and making goosebumps, and only the skin pores that need to be constricted. Even just one of those skin pores is a complex system with its hairs and muscles. It's an amazing feat of engineering, and yet you've got millions of them found all over your body. These things shout out design, intent, purpose, strategy, not random chance. The scientific evidence indicates that design is the logical choice for how the human body arrived in the universe, but design requires planning, and planning requires intent behind it. Intent requires thinking. Thinking requires a mind. An evolutionary theory and any atheistic explanation of the universe has no mind to be involved in the process. It's just based on randomness and chaos and chance. God, the supermind behind the universe, the chief engineer, clearly created the human body. No wonder the psalmist said, "I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well." I hope this morning that you've seen a little bit more of what he's talking about. Thank you for your attention.